This is the Tree of Life, Season 13, Chapter 9. In this episode, we will be elaborating the last episode, with respect to the Q factor leading to infinite recursion, and integrating the discussion from the complete series in relation to tension. To start out, the bodily rhythms or cycles, again, are resonant cavities, with a pair of chiral structures, each one corresponding to a particular phase of the cycle. These structures have affirmational and negational components corresponding to dialectical impulses on either side of the structure. Now, we noted in a previous episode that it is in the affirmation of an impulse that tension within the body is released. Thus, in the flipping back and forth between phases corresponding to these chiral structures, there is a tension release. We also note that within a dissonant space, through the sublimation process, verbalizations corresponding to specific word associations are created which prolong the phase corresponding to a particular cycle. We hypothesize that the Q factor described in the last episode with respect to resonant cavities corresponding to the cycles or rhythms by order can be determined as a function of the particular relationships between the resonant cavities or cycles associated with those orders. In other words, the cavities associated with each order, as they have a resonant frequency, a natural oscillatory frequency, possess a kind of density. And the function corresponding to the relationship between those cycles generates the Q factor associated with an individual at a particular time. In other words, if you elongate the phase associated with a particular order of a cycle, then you alter the Q factor associated with that individual at that particular moment by modifying the function describing the relationship between those cycles. We can thus conceptualize an individual embedded within their bodily cycles as a simple harmonic oscillator like a tuning fork. The density associated with those cycles determines the particular natural frequency of the oscillator. In other words, as the various cycles flip from phase to phase, we see a tension release in the body, according to a particular frequency. As we explored in an early episode on hybrid structures, exclusionary word associations form through these structures, by way of dialectical impulses, as between two bound individuals, one being negational and the other affirmational. Thus, the linking of word associations together preserves a larger structure within the conjoint consensuality through these word associations. The incorporation of new sublimating language within existing word associations manipulates that larger structure, whilst transmuting the tension, which is not released by the flipping of phase into the structure. In other words, both the alteration of the length of phase from the natural frequency and the incorporation of the tension, which is not released into a larger structure, plays a role in the alteration of a person's Q factor at any given time. Since we know that a mismatch between input and output is associated with a high Q factor, we see that there is a link between the separation of time parsimony within the conjoined space from path parsimony for the individual caused by a high Q factor. That's the end of the podcast for today.